Mm.
Maybe. Very good. Webby said Webby said it's weird.
Check one, check one. Yes, test.
Check. Check 1, 2.
Hello, everyone. I am going to ask you to wrap up that last little piece of conversation. Finish your last sentence. Come to a period at the end of a sentence, and then, as they say in Britain, full stop. Thank you. Okay, hello, everyone. Welcome. I'm so happy to be back, and I'm really happy to see you. And I have put together a mostly chronological presentation of my sabbatical, and I'm going to be talking about images and certain things that I learned over certain periods of time, over the period of time and the different things. And my sense is that they will weave in and out a little bit. So, the first thing to say that is my sabbatical did not go to plan. And I knew that, actually, even before I got COVID, just 4 days before my sabbatical was to start. And so at a certain point in all of this, I decided that rather than trying to have some mountaintop transcendent experience to bring back to you and talk to you about, how intoxicated I was by my spiritual learnings, I would adopt a theme of play. And I talked a little bit about that before I left. And I also wanted to explore how resting could be resistance, which is based on the title of the book that was the first on my sabbatical list. It is called Rest is Resistance, a Manifesto. And it's by Tricia Hersey, who is also the founder of the NAP Ministry.
Starting that ministry?
Actually, so I'll be talking about a lot of the things that I did and a little bit more about the stuff that I learned in a sermon entitled "What I Learned on My Sabbatical." Right? Although I will tell you that one of the things that I learned to do was to nap, and I probably took 7 amazing naps. And given that I may have taken 5 in my entire lifetime up to that point. My father was a napper, and my sister inherited that gene, and I did not. So, and I did indeed learn to rest, and I also discovered how this now 65-year-old plays. And I'll talk more about resting and resisting going forward, because that is a big learning that I had about how we all don't need to be. The way we drive ourselves in this culture is problematic, and it's problematic in all aspects of our lives. I'll be preaching to you about that. But much of this idea is actually captured by a quotation that I read recently from Rebecca Solnit, who also is somebody who clearly read this book. If you're sick or injured and healing or growing a new life inside you, or just worn out, please notice that the thing known as doing nothing is when you're doing the utterly crucial and precious work of growing and healing and restoring. This also goes for everyone who's just worn down, exhausted, and dispirited, and who is not that right now. I'm for the power of rest and the holiness of respite and the you that is your cells and circulatory system and all those inner workings that are so mysterious and necessary and regenerative if we will let them be. Take refuge in that beautiful stillness in which everything is happening in all ways that nothing. Okay, wait a minute. This is a good sentence, and I'm not reading it right. Take refuge in that beautiful stillness in which everything is happening in all the ways that nothing is happening in busyness. Everything happens in the depths, like deep water under a reflective surface, a lake reflecting clouds with schools of fish in the depths. Sitting still as zazen, or just daydreaming or watching clouds, is an act of revolt against the shouts that we should be doing something, do more faster, that are all around us. So part of what my sabbatical was about learning not to listen to those voices and to and when those voices got quieted, not silenced necessarily, what else could arise? And so those first 3 weeks, three weeks of my sabbatical, 3 were spent getting over COVID. And past my fears of wasting my sabbatical time by not having some grander goal. Or fearing that somehow I was going to fail at the sabbatical. And I was going to come back here and have to say to all of you, I failed, I didn't do my sabbatical right. And that I hadn't accomplished enough and you would not be impressed enough by whatever it was I did. And I got through that with some help and just time and some wise voices of counsel that I have in my life. And so what follows here is a roughly chronological account of my sabbatical and the ways that I rested and played and reconnected with myself, friends, family, neighbors, critters, etc. And so, though I did not end up, the big thing that I thought might happen and didn't, I didn't end up traveling to England for a retreat with the poet David Whyte, who I adore. But I did manage to test negative just in time to spend Easter weekend at a much smaller retreat with David Whyte at Asilomar, where I had never been before. And it was there that the first sabbatical blues and oranges found me. For after the retreat, I went to the Monterey Bay Aquarium and saw actual puffins. Oh my God, I love puffins. And there they were, and jellyfish with their undersea choreography. Okay, and yes, that was spring break week at the Monterey Bay Aquarium. It was pretty loud. But I saw me puffins. And then on my way back from Monterey, I stopped at San Simeon, which I had never managed to go see ever in all the time I've been in California, and then I'm here and I'm closer than I've ever been. And this is all despite the fact that I am such a movie buff. And I am so taken with the seeming glamour of old Hollywood. And at this point, I had not quite connected with the sabbatical blues theme, but it was already starting. Blue is my favorite color, and then moments like, that particular indoor pool at San Simeon is stunning, even if Hearst is a little creepy. And it was somewhere in there that I began to realize that that my sabbatical was going to be a series of smaller trips and not some big grand tour. And so my next trip was a COVID-delayed trip east to meet my grandnephew, Forrest Elliott Warsnop, for the very first time. Now, Forrest and his parents live in the Maryland suburbs of DC. And so the plan had been for me to go to General Assembly back east and go meet him just before he turned 2 in June of 2020. Yeah. So that didn't happen. And now in this picture, he is soon to turn 5. He turned 5 about a week ago. And Forrest really seemed to like his Auntie Dana. He loves to be read to, and I even got to read him to sleep one night. And he also loves rocket ships and trains, which would turn out to be a great bonding experience between us. And hanging out with a not quite 5-year-old turns out to be a great way to play in that sort of, the way we think of the way kids play. So I got to play. And we slid down a slide.
You know what? We can get past the water. I'll show you how. Maybe you'll see if you would. Okay. And then go on this side.
Oh, you can't hear the sound real well. It's fine.
There. Okay. And then you go first.
Wee.
There is a little spot of water.
Okay. Wee.
Okay, slid down a slide, and we swang. I swang on a swing with my nephew Alec, Forrest Dad's, and you might listen for the way Alec teases me toward the end of this. I don't know how well you'll hear it.
I'm gonna get high on Auntie Dana.
I don't know.
You were helping me swing. Now, Forrest, something that's good to know about the Worsnop family is if you make it a competition, members of the Worsnop family will try very hard.
Wow. Oh, I'm getting.
Yeah. So he started. I totally took the bait. Totally. He said something. I'm going to swing higher than you're going to swing, and then I took off. Yeah. A lesson in Worsnop heritage. Yeah. And then came the second part of the long-delayed trip, which was that I had planned 3 years before. It was something else that I'd always wanted to do. And I took the train across country in a sleeper car. And Alec told me that Forrest's head practically exploded when he told him that I was going to be on a train for 4 days and 3 nights. And Amtrak has this app where you can track the route of the train and where it is on its route and how delayed it is. And mine was pretty delayed. And so they could see where I was over the whole trip. And he could not believe that this had happened. He could not have been more thrilled. And it was like a little moving retreat for me in my tiny monk's cell. And I read and I wrote and I met new people in the dining car. And the only problem was that it didn't last long enough. And I think my next trip might be all the way across Canada. I do not know if the Orient Express still exists or some version of it, but I may be going there. And then, and that's the sleeper part. And the book that is on the bed there is, I think that's Emma by Jane Austen. That's part of my sabbatical I'll talk more about. And then there's the dining car and the roses and the dining car and and Cary Grant was not on this train. Yeah, at sunset. Yeah. So, and after the train trip, came what might have been the sweetest part of my whole sabbatical, because I was home. Except for I took a quick trip to LA to see some sights there, but I was home for 6 or 7 weeks. And just home. And I fell into this sweet and steady rhythm of my days that was lovely. And there were beach walks and tennis and reading and writing and napping. And then, I learned to talk to my neighbors when I ran into them and not rush off. And I wrote in the morning and I wrote in the evening and I did stuff in between. And my house was so much cleaner than it is right now. It's amazing. And one of the things I realized early on is that I was going to consider it a successful sabbatical if I came from it with a calmer dog. This is Jasper. And Jasper has anxiety that expresses itself in being very reactive and fierce and barky. And it's been problematic, and I've been working with a trainer and doing all this stuff. And he's getting better. And I can't tell you that he's perfect, but I'll tell you he is much calmer. So yay, success. And so this was about the time, so he's calming down, I'm calming down, we're resting. And at some point in it, this poem by William Stafford came to mind. And it describes for me the feeling of it more. A favorite poem. Notes for the program. Just ordinary days, please. I wouldn't want them any better. About the pace of life, it seems better to have slow, if I can stand them, revelations. And take this message about the inevitable. I've decided it's all right if it comes. And that sort of just became the, slow, if I can stand them, revelations. Not a mountaintop experience, but just these sweet moments of experiencing delight, of taking time to play, slide down a slide, swing on a swing, do some of the other things you'll see more of, and be alive and moving through. And the inevitable comes to us all. There's all kinds of inevitabilities. My sabbatical inevitably ended. Our lives inevitably end. I think that Stafford is talking about mortality in that sense. But there are so many places and endings in our lives. And part of, I think that so many of religions talk about this, and this is, absolutely the Buddha, but not just exclusive to Buddhism, is, everything arises and passes away. The inevitable will always arrive. Let's be here with it. And I was able to, really, for a good chunk of time. That was a delight. And so after that came General Assembly in Pittsburgh, and which included a visit to the Andy Warhol Museum. Warhol, which was a total kick. Warhol grew up in Pittsburgh. And so that's why the museum is there. And this is a lovely room. Yeah. And I have to tell you, that's the most delightful thing in the museum. Warhol was a little weird. He could go to some really dark places, or not dark, isn't quite it, sordid. He definitely, and he was on the, he was on the cutting edge of the 60s and 50s, 60s, and 70s art world. So, General Assembly was in Pittsburgh, which is also where my best friend from high school lives, and Laura. And so I visited her again there. And my favorite stop with Laura was at the Phipps Conservatory, which I've now been to several times, which had a tribute to the work of Billy Porter, who also grew up in Pittsburgh. And this quote summed up a lot of what I was experiencing. For me, life is about being positive and hopeful, choosing to be joyful, choosing to be encouraging, choosing to be empowering. And so they had this exhibit of Billy Porter's work made up of flowers from the Phipps Conservatory. And so, so these are like his dresses and I don't know how many of you, I know that everybody knows Billy Porter. He is a queer, I don't think he's trans, but and I don't think it's necessarily drag, but he just dresses up in the most flamboyant things, and he's a man saying, I get to wear really fun stuff. Does anybody know the show that he is? Was he in Kinky Boots? He was in Kinky Boots, and then he had some show on television, and I don't know. He's a delightful, energetic person. So anyway, I was there with Laura, and that's Laura and me, and we just had fun. We just had fun there. And so then I was in Pittsburgh, and which I realized that Pittsburgh is in Western. Don't play that yet. But this is the coolest thing. Western Pittsburgh is really practically bumps up against Michigan, and my brother lives in Western Michigan in a little town called Paw Paw, Michigan, which is outside Kalamazoo. And so I deliberately flew through Detroit Metro Airport, where there is a fountain in the middle of this. There's a very long terminal in the middle of it, which connects to other terminals, is this fountain that is a work of art. There's no way it can ever be done justice in a photograph or even a video, but I tried. I tell everyone anyway, let's play it. Oh my God, I love you. So it goes through this whole cycle. It starts out completely just almost like a reflective pool. And then it does these little drips and drabs, and then it gets going. And honestly, it takes somewhere between 3 and 5 minutes to go through the whole sequence until it stops. And I deliberately fly through Detroit if I can, so I can see this. And I tell everyone that, I know, and now you get to know this too, it's worth going through Detroit. It's a Delta hub. It's not a main hub, but a lot of Delta flights fly through there. And it's just go and take the time, take all 5 minutes. It is just stunning. And so I did a number of things that I'd always wanted to do, and this is a thing that I want to do more. I've done and I want to do more of. And it is this, for me, this is another example of delight. Seek delight. Just every time it's so magical. And like I said, you're there and, there's not a good background to it, and people are walking around and doing stuff, and there's the sound. So I knew it wasn't capturing anywhere near its delight. And please go if ever you are in the place, in that area. And so then the next thing was going to Michigan, which is where I grew up. I grew up in this part of Michigan, and my brother moved to that part of Michigan. And that is my brother Greg in the middle, and his wife Sue. And I don't love taking selfies. But we went to a baseball game in a minor league team. It was a AAA? No, it wasn't. It might have been AA in Grand Rapids. And we're a baseball family. Love it. And then we also went to, this is a beach on the shores of Lake Michigan. And people beyond the Midwest often don't know, but the western coast of Michigan, the southwestern coast, is right on Lake Michigan. And there are these amazing sand dunes. And so we also went there. I didn't get a good picture of it, but in terms of the vibrant colors, I saw cardinals. And I grew up with cardinals, and and Baltimore Orioles, they're not called, no, they're Baltimore Orioles stopped being called Baltimore Orioles until then because Lord Baltimore was not necessarily the greatest guy in the world. But then the city of Baltimore got kind of cranky about that. And the Orioles in Baltimore, yeah. So they're Baltimore Orioles again, but they're bright orange and black, and then there's real Blue Jays, which are not scrub jays, they are Blue Jays, all kinds of the birds of my childhood. I got no great pictures of that. And my final trip was a road trip up to Moscow, Idaho, where dear colleague lives, with stops along the way, with the dogs, and one of the things along the way was Crater Lake, which I had never seen before either. Oh, that one was supposed to, Crater Lake. And this is where the Sabbatical Blues finally, the title came to me. And also what happened is I'd driven up to Klamath Falls. And this was also part of this spring and into summer. Remember how May Gray started in April? And then it went all the way through May, and it went all the way, and then June gloom came. And then I went, and I really started to wonder if I was, it doesn't usually bother me, but I was starting to wonder if I was getting seasonal affective disorder. It was just like, I want to see the sun. So then I go to GA, it's in Pittsburgh, and I'm thinking, great, I'll get some sun. But it was overcast the whole time. A good thunderstorm, and that was cool. And then I go to Michigan, more sun. The smoke from the fires in Canada was all in on it. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to die. And so what happened is I went up to Crater, I stopped in Sacramento to see a friend, and then went to Klamath Falls, and then took a day between Klamath Falls and Bend and stopped at Crater Lake. And I'm going by Klamath Falls and Klamath Lake, I suddenly noticed there was this dome of blue sky. And it was like, I haven't seen you in so long. And I didn't get a picture of this, but the lake, it was at that time of day when the reflection and the lake seemed to be a shimmery, glowy, light blue. And I fell in love with that blue. And then I go to Crater Lake. Sweet, merciful heavens. And it was like every kind of blue from cobalt from royal blue to cobalt to sapphire blue, and then I was just incredibly swept away by those blues. And again, the stop for delight, stop for joy, play, figure out how you play, those kinds of things coming to me. And so among the delights, once I got to Idaho, were Jasper learning to swim in a clear mountain lake. Well, and neither of my dogs swim in the ocean. They play at the shore. And he was like, he'd swum before, but I don't know that he really knew he could swim any great distance. So threw up, and Scout, my other dog, doesn't like swimming. When his feet leave the bottom, he freaks out. So Jasper would go get the ball, and Scout would bark furiously, like jealous and all of that stuff. But, dude, what can you do? Okay, and so there was that, and then there was me going down a water slide. We get to, okay, there we go. Oh my God, that was fun. Oh, that was fun. And it was one of those where at the top of it, it's in a tunnel, and it gets pretty dark, and it's like a drop. Like, when is it gonna end? And I will say, at one point, I had hoped to go to Six Flags and do some roller coasters, and that did not end up happening. But I got on a water slide. And then one of the other joys that I found was the trip, getting there, I went up faster, but it took longer to come back. And I went down the eastern side of the Sierra, and I took off the main routes and just finding my way. And I stayed at a place with a natural hot springs, and this in Oregon, southeastern Oregon, which is just, oh my God. And then there was this. It is not entirely a natural geyser. I think it's somehow enhanced. And there's this little place called Hunter's Hot Springs that's a little down. It's a little raggedy on the edges, and they're trying to pull it back. But it was like traveling back, I don't know, 40, 50 years ago. And it was just really lovely. And I discovered that kind of travel is really, there's a sweetness to that as well. Just discovering. And so then from there, I came down and I rediscovered Mono Lake. And I happened to get there at this golden hour, and I was like, oh yeah, this is really cool. I'd been there once, I don't know, 40 or 50 years ago. No, yeah, not quite 50. And then I discovered a very sweet mountain cabin getaway. And when I got there, I was just going to stay there one night and then come all the way home. And I saw this, and I'm like, I cannot leave you. Just one night. And as it turned out, I could stay there another couple nights, so we did. And then I discovered Mammoth. Where I had never been before. Oh, really? And this is one of my favorite places, and that particular mountain cabin I'm going back to with my dogs. We took a hike around Convict Lake. There is so much water and snow still up there. This was toward the end of July, and they were still skiing on Mammoth Mountain. And at Convict Lake, there's a trail all the way, it's about 3 miles all the way around it, and then there's a particular snow thing melting into a creek, and they have a boardwalk over one section of it, which was completely poured over by water. And so luckily, Jasper was fine with swimming, and Scout had to deal. Because I did not have to wade in very deep or for very long, and he was on a leash and he just came along. And this was the highest point that I got to at Minaret Vista at 9,265. And also just given the craziness of the winter we had, Tioga Pass was still not open. I think it had just opened when I got there. So, so just a few other things about what I learned about playing and resting, rejuvenating, trying to create a more human rhythm to life. What I find to be fun. One of the other things that I did was I reread every book by Jane Austen.
Oh, wow.
And this is Pride and Prejudice, which I am not quite finished with because I left it for last because I've probably read this at least 15 times. One of my favorite books of all time. And I'm not certain that I'd read some of the others more than once. And to really take the time and just let her language into me. And I also read a biography, so I had not known that much about her. And it was so much fun to take the time to do that. And so that was one of the things I did. And I did read a number of books. Another one that, and I'm sure I'll be preaching out of this one, This is a book called An Immense World by Ed Yong, who's a science writer. He won a Pulitzer for the writing that he did on COVID in the Atlantic. He's a really, really fine science writer. He's such a good writer. And what this is about how every animal has, we all have different senses, and our senses do different things for us. And some animals have stronger senses here and others there. And, and that what we end up with is, and there's some early 20th century, biologist, scientist who came up with this term, Umwelt, that we have our own world that we sense. And that the Umwelt of every different animal is different, and so they sense things differently, and they sense different things, and he's a delightful writer. Where there's somebody, he has both endnotes and footnotes, and he was such a good writer that I read all of his footnotes because there was like some quirky little funny thing that really would have disrupted the flow of the actual narrative, but they were all so good. So this was, and I highly recommend this. Another thing that I did was I spent some time trying to find an organizer that would help me plan and keep everything together. Many of you know how calendrically challenged I can be, and I just can't keep stuff straight. And I've also sort of given up that okay, here we are. This is the way I am. If you have a meeting with me and you want to send me a reminder of the meeting a day or 5 minutes beforehand, there are moments I may read your email and go, I knew that, but I don't always. Thank you. Go right ahead. Anyways, I was trying to find a planner that worked, and I found something that I really liked. But I, how planners, they all have their own system, and I didn't use half of what their system was and stuff. And then I realized, doing some other research, that so what I do use is this is a moleskin. Those of you who love these things know moleskins. And moleskin is a little bit precious because they talk all about how this was the favorite writing book of Ernest Hemingway, and they charge you for that kind of stuff. But that all I needed to do is enliven my own, I could use this and then just enliven it. Let me just find a page that looks particularly good. So I got these stickers. And they're colorful and fun, and I have lists, and and it makes me happy. Is it going to make me remember our meeting? Maybe, hopefully. And then there are the 7 naps that I took. It might have been more. And just coming back with with a different perspective, and I found this rhythm, and of course I'm not going to be able to do that entire rhythm and work, my full-time job as a minister. What pieces of it can I keep? What pieces of it can adapt to this? And also a refusal, that might be too strong a word, but a disinclination to rush through things. And so when I encounter my neighbor, and we just start having one of those neighborly conversations, and I know I have to be somewhere, I'm stopping. And I'm saying, and we're having that 10-minute conversation as opposed to the, hi, gotta go kind of thing, and slowing down and doing that sort of thing. And I will talk more about this, but I am deeper and more deeply convinced that what we are here for as humans, but also I think what we are here for as a church, is about the relationships we have with each other, the depth of them, the connections that we make, the challenges that we come upon, because we're wildly human, each and every one of us, right? And we're all noble and flawed, and funny and self-defeating and generous and thoughtful and kind and distracted and cranky and irritable, or all of those things. So how do we slow down, take the time, have the relationships that create the community that then bring us back out into the world powerfully and living our values and all of that good stuff. So that's what we're going to do, okay? So that is my report on what I did on my sabbatical. Oh my God, and I said it would be 45 minutes. And we have a microphone here. I wanted to give us a little bit of time for people to, questions, comments, whatever, and I'll respond to, I don't know, whatever you got. Would you take this?
Yes.
And then can you pass it around to the next person, please? Thank you.
Yes, you're lucky.
I turned it on.
You did?
Yeah.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah.
You
Brian
gotta
needed
go
to flip
this
the
way.
switch. Yeah.
Two things. You're glad you're not Nico.
I'm glad what?
Reverend Nico.
Oh, Nika.
Nika. Her sabbatical went differently than yours. Anyway, so I'm glad yours went well. And the other thing too is next time you go up to Mammoth, stop in Manzanar.
Oh. I saw that Manzanar was on my way out, and it was my last day, and I was going home, but I thought the same
Big time.
thing. Yeah, and also about Nika, I have this comparing mind thing. It's Buddhists go through all kinds of mind states, and and there's the monkey mind and all of those things. And I read a book once that talked about comparing mind, and I laughed out loud because I do that all the time. Oh, that person has it more together than I do, and
That's called a human mind.
yeah, it's a human mind, and it's a particular kind of state of human mind. I don't have them all, but I got comparing mind. And Nika, even without all the drama, Nika had planned much bigger things. She went someplace in South America, and then she walked the Camino de Santiago, and then she, went off the trail and fell and broke both of her ankles and needed to be hospitalized. And a UU colleague who lived in Portugal 7 hours away had to drive and pick her up and save her and do all of this stuff. And at first I was like, oh, great, Nika, you're doing the mountaintop experience is great, and I'm not. And then I'm like, I'm just fine with this. Thank you very much. This is good. Yeah. So anyway,
Anybody else? I'll walk around.
thank you. Thank you, Kathy.
So my question is, what made your nap so great?
Okay, I'll tell you this story. I'm going to preach using this book as a text on whatever Sunday that is. But this is a long story, so I'll tell it here, and maybe a shorter version in the. It's not a super long story, but in the sermon. So this book is lovely, and it's short, and it's really repetitive. And when I first read it, I thought, oh my God, this is terribly written. And, it sounds like she had an essay that was published somewhere that she tried to stretch to just make it into a book. And that wasn't a very kind thought, but it's what occurred to me. And then another friend who'd had similar reaction read something by her that said that she did that on purpose. Let me stop back. And then, so it's so repetitive, blah, 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 and I'm just reading it, and I'm getting to the end, and I'm thinking, I just have to finish this book. Oh my God, it's so repetitive. Oh my God, I just can't believe I'm doing this. And I was like, I put it down, and I took the longest nap I've ever had, like the first really big nap. And I thought, I wonder if there's a connection. That's when a friend of mine read something by her. She said it was intentional, that it was like it was an incantation, that she kept repeating and repeating and repeating this thing, and I don't know. I'll read more from it, use it as a text more, but Anyway, so I just took an amazing nap. And then I took more. And I don't know that it was this, it was time, it was space, it was other things, but I took naps that I had dreams in, really big dreams in the actual nap. So, yeah. Steve, and then Gudrun has her hand up.
I want to ask you, Dana, is there a blueprint for what a UU minister's sabbatical should be all about? In other words, is there something that you're held to and or aspire to have any type of a sabbatical that you would deem successful?
There is a stereotype that I think I was bumping up against. And I will say that the UU ministry used to be considered, people would talk about it as a scholarly ministry, that we were scholars and that we studied. And, and this was in the day when, mostly men and mostly much more academic kinds of pursuits. And I had a point and someplace I was going to go with that I lost. But more and more, no, there is no blueprint. And it's a little bit more that it's something that I created in the back of my head. I'm also learning so much more. I know this, but, relearning lessons in new ways that you already knew about expectations and what the expectations are and trying to meet the expectations. And when expectations, what is the secret to happiness? Low expectations. For self and others and stuff. So there has been in the past that's what I was going to say. So we used to call ourselves a scholarly ministry or a learned ministry. And we are now, the UUMA has specifically decided that, it's not like that we call ourselves a learning ministry, that it's an active process of learning and growing, and it's not like we are learned. I'm done, scholarly at a certain level, but it's a constant unfoldment. And so it's a shift that we are deliberately making, and we're not talking about it being learning as just being academic and scholarly, but learning being, the spiritual, plenty of people probably go on long retreats, and some people do things like walk the Camino de Santiago because it's a pilgrimage, and there are all kinds of things that people do. But more and more, the way people talk about it is more from the point of view is what is the rest and what are the learnings that we can get from the experience and reflecting on experience rather than trying really hard to read a pile of books. And I read about 10 books. 12? 15? Not 15. Oh, I have another point about that.
Apropos, I'm curious, Dana, when you meet people and you get into a conversation of some depth, and invariably, I would guess, up comes, what kind of work do you do? Where are you from? Those questions are asked.
Mm-hmm.
So when you were asked, if you were asked, what is your occupation and what do you do for a living and that kind of thing, what did you tell them and how did you get into the subject of your profession?
I mostly tell them what I do. Sometimes I don't because it's just, it's just not worth it. And then I do actually have an elevator speech, and I use it, some version of it with people, and then it depends on how they respond. I will often change the subject because it's just, and anyway, because people have all kinds of ideas about what it means to be a minister, which have probably little to do with me, and so, but it's complicated. Yeah. Oh, so one other thing I wanted
Thank you.
Thank you, sorry. So one other thing I wanted to say about the reading thing, which isn't exactly what you asked, Steve, but it was part of my answer. One of the things that happened to me, and I've heard other clergy say this, reading is one of the great joys of my life. And once I started practicing ministry on my internship, and I was out of seminary, I read maybe a quarter of what I used to read. I used to have 2 or 3 books going all the time. And it has been, it's something that I have really lamented losing. I love to read. And so that was part of the simple joy of just, taking the time with Jane Austen and then looking at I read them in order and looking at the growth of her as a novelist, as an artist, and then, the tragedy of she died very young and all of that stuff. I mean, it was just such a delight to be able to read. So sometimes I don't know that I could ever have gotten all the way through this book, and it was a great joy. So that is another thing that I actually did. It wasn't as many books as it might have been. It wasn't a huge stack. It wasn't the main focus. But oh my God, it was lovely. Yeah. So. Todd, use a microphone, please. We are actually, this is Zooming. Hi, Zoom people. I'm sorry I didn't greet you at the very beginning.
Did you meet people along the way who've become, let's say, potentially long-term friends?
Interesting question. No, but I could have. One of the things that happened is I went to the first thing I did was went to the retreat in Asilomar with David White. And I swear I was testing positive all the way up, and Friday morning, and it was getting slightly fainter, and Friday morning it still tested faintly positive, and I was still having some symptoms, and I said, I don't care, I'm going. A mask. And Saturday morning I was negative, and so I was glad that I would have been really mad at myself for not going. And I met a woman there who's from Santa Barbara who, she and I hit it off like that. And it was really great. And we got, David White invites people to depth in a particularly interesting way, and fast and really deep and authentic. And so she and I just ended up having all our meals together and sitting together and doing all that. And we talked about it, and we looked at each other and said, do you want to try to connect? And she's like, I don't know, is this kind of like a summer camp friendship? You know how you have a really close friend and you make it camp, and then some of them last and some of them don't. And I said, yeah, I think maybe we can. And I think we texted twice. And I just realized that there are people who are much closer even than Santa Barbara that I don't have as much time for, et cetera. And so no, I could have. And I just realized that I didn't. But it was sort of like an intentional, thoughtful thing. And it was interesting. So, sort of, is my answer to your question. And I would say, so Wendy and then Jim, did you have a question?
Yeah.
Okay, so Wendy, then Jim, and I suggest that we have dessert after that.
Mine's very brief. I just want to know what trail the woman was on when she broke her feet or her ankles, so that I can just either plan on that it's dangerous or decide not to go.
Okay, so what Nika apparently did was she was on the Camino de Santiago, which is a much traveled path, and she went off the trail to go to some, like the ruins of a monastery or something, and she was far enough off the trail that she couldn't, when she tried calling out and she couldn't be heard, and she happened to trip on some old stairs. It's one of those random kind of things, but she was alone, and that's why it was even more dramatic.
My friend went there and broke his hip, and then they went back. Then they decided to go back a couple of years later to finish, go from where they left off.
I have no idea what Nika will do, but our sabbaticals overlapped, so the comparing continues.
So very briefly, what is this vaunted David White about?
Oh, David White Let me see if I can find the first poem that I ever found by him. David White is, he is he is an Irish parent and an English parent. And I forget which country he was actually born in. And he became a poet. He lives in the Pacific Northwest. I think he lives on, it's not Bainbridge, it might be Bainbridge Island. And he has become a poet who then leads people on retreats and things. He is probably the most successful poet financially in America. Yeah, probably so. And for a while he did, he did corporate kinds of trainings on poetry in corporations. And he's a masterful leader of group experiences. And I'm just going to read, this is the first poem of his that I ever encountered. Oh, come on. Okay. It's called Sweet Darkness. When your eyes are tired, the world is tired also. When your vision has gone, no part of the world can find you. Time to go into the dark where the night has eyes to recognize its own. There you can be sure you are not beyond love. The dark will be your home tonight. The night will give you a horizon farther than you can see. You must learn one thing. The world was made to be free in. Give up all the other worlds except the one to which you belong. Sometimes it takes the darkness and the sweet confinement of your aloneness to learn. Anything or anyone that does not bring you alive is too small for you. So that's the kind of poetry he writes. He's somewhere between Mary Oliver and John O'Donohue. John O'Donohue was one of his mentors. And he leads these retreats in 4 parts. There's one in Ireland, there's one in the Lake County, there's one in Tuscany, there's one in someplace else. And where you hike, the one I wanted to go to was in the Lake District, and you hiked in the morning and then you went out to some of his favorite pubs for lunch or dinner and had, wildly deep conversations with fun and interesting people. And part of the reason I didn't get into, or wasn't accepted into it, he keeps it deliberately small. And it turns out that because he hadn't done them in 3 years because of COVID, that the demand was super high. And he was, there were like 30 people and he was having 300 people apply. So that's why I was rejected. I was not accepted. Anyway, so I may yet go to one of them, but anyway. So I want to say hello, goodbye to folks in Zoom. And thank you all for being here. And let's go have dessert.